There comes a moment in life when you begin to feel tired, not physically, but emotionally. Tired of chasing people who don't value you, tired of explaining yourself to those who refuse to understand, tired of holding on to relationships that only bring pain to your heart. And in that quiet moment, deep within you, a realization begins to grow. Perhaps the problem is not always what you are losing, but what you are holding onto. Self-reflection is one of the most powerful, yet often neglected acts of worship a believer can engage in. In the rush of daily life, we become so focused on what others are doing, what others are saying, and how others are living that we forget to pause and look within ourselves. We analyze people, we judge situations, we react to circumstances, but rarely do we sit down and ask ourselves the most important questions. Where am I standing in my relationship with Allah? What kind of person am I becoming? And is my heart moving closer to Him or further away? You see, true growth does not begin when you change your surroundings. It begins when you change your perspective about yourself. A person who constantly points fingers at others will remain stuck, but the one who turns inward with honesty and humility begins a journey of transformation. In Islam, this is deeply rooted in the concept of accountability. Before we are held accountable on the day of judgment, we are encouraged to hold ourselves accountable in this life. This is not to burden yourself with guilt, but to awaken your qalb, to make you conscious, aware, and alive. When you start reflecting on your actions, your intentions, and your habits, something remarkable happens. You begin to notice patterns. You begin to recognize the moments where you reacted with anger when patience was needed, where you spoke unnecessarily when silence would have been better, where you sought validation from people instead of turning to Allah. And this awareness is not meant to break you. It is meant to build you, because once you see your weaknesses clearly, you are in a position to work on them sincerely. Personal growth in Islam is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming better than you were yesterday. It is a continuous journey, a process of refining your character, purifying your intentions, and strengthening your connection with your Creator. And this journey requires effort. It requires you to be honest with yourself even when it is uncomfortable. It requires you to admit your mistakes without justifying them. It requires you to step away from distractions and dedicate time to understanding your purpose. Many people fear self-reflection because they are afraid of what they might discover. They are afraid to confront their own shortcomings, their own flaws, their own sins. But avoiding the truth does not change it. Ignoring a wound does not heal it. It only allows it to grow worse. Similarly, ignoring your spiritual state will not improve it. It is only when you face yourself with sincerity that healing begins. And remember, no matter how many mistakes you have made, Allah's mercy is always greater. The door of repentance is always open, waiting for you to take that step back. When you focus on yourself in this way, you also begin to free yourself from the unnecessary burden of comparing your life to others. You realize that your journey is unique, your tests are specific to you, and your relationship with Allah is personal. You stop measuring your worth by people's opinions and start measuring it by your sincerity, your effort, and your intentions. This shift alone brings a sense of peace that cannot be described. And as you grow, you will notice that your priorities begin to change. Things that once seemed so important start to lose their value. The need for constant approval fades away, and in its place comes contentment. You begin to invest more in your character than your image, more in your akhirat than your dunya, more in what Allah sees than what people say. This is the beauty of focusing on yourself. It aligns your life with your purpose. It also teaches you responsibility. Instead of blaming others for your situation, you begin to ask, what can I do better? Instead of dwelling on what went wrong, you focus on how you can improve. This mindset empowers you. It shifts you from being a victim of circumstances to being a person of action, a person of growth, a person of direction. And perhaps one of the most beautiful outcomes of self-reflection is that it softens your heart. When you become aware of your own flaws, you become less harsh towards others. You develop empathy, understanding, and patience. You realize that just as you are struggling, others are too. And this realization transforms the way you interact with people. So take time to sit with yourself, away from the noise, away from the distractions, and have an honest conversation with your heart. Not once, not occasionally, but regularly. Because the one who knows themselves begins to understand their purpose, and the one who understands their purpose walks through life with clarity, sincerity, and a qalb that is connected to Allah Letting go of toxic relationships is one of the most difficult decisions a person can make, especially when emotions are deeply involved. It is not easy to distance yourself from someone you once cared about, someone you trusted, someone you invested your time, energy, and qalb into. But sometimes, the very relationships we hold on to so tightly are the ones that slowly drain us, weaken us, and pull us away from who we are meant to be. You see, not every relationship is a blessing in its continuation. Some are a test of your patience, others are a lesson in your growth, and some are simply not meant to remain in your life forever. The challenge is recognizing the difference. A toxic relationship is not always obvious. It does not always come in the form of open harm or clear negativity. Sometimes it is subtle. It is the constant feeling of being unappreciated, the silent pressure to change who you are, the emotional exhaustion after every interaction, the anxiety that replaces peace. Islam teaches us to value our inner peace and to protect our hearts from harm. Your qalb is not something insignificant. It is the place where your faith resides, where your intentions are formed, where your connection with Allah is nurtured. So when a relationship constantly disturbs your peace, distracts you from your ibadat, or pushes you toward negativity, it becomes something you must reflect on seriously. Because protecting your heart is not selfish, it is necessary. Many people stay in toxic relationships out of fear, fear of loneliness, fear of judgment, fear of letting go of what feels familiar. They convince themselves that things will change, that if they just try harder, give more, tolerate more, everything will become better. But there comes a point where patience is no longer productive, where your efforts are no longer reciprocated, where your silence begins to harm you more than it helps. And at that point, you must ask yourself a very honest question. Is this relationship bringing me closer to Allah, or is it pulling me away? Letting go does not mean you hate the person. It does not mean you wish them harm or carry bitterness in your heart. In fact, true strength lies in walking away with dignity, with forgiveness, and with sincerity. You can make dua for someone and still choose to distance yourself from them. You can care about someone and still recognize that they are not good for your well-being. This balance is difficult, but it is powerful. There is also a misunderstanding that holding on is always a sign of loyalty and letting go is a sign of weakness. But in reality, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to walk away. It takes courage to choose nafsik when you are used to choosing others. It takes strength to set boundaries when you have spent your life breaking them for the sake of keeping people around. And it takes iman to trust that by letting go of something harmful, Allah will replace it with something better. When you remove toxic influences from your life, you create space. Space for peace, space for clarity, space for growth. You begin to rediscover yourself. You reconnect with your purpose. You find the energy that was once drained and redirect it towards something meaningful. And most importantly, you strengthen your relationship with Allah because you are no longer distracted by what pulls you away from Him. Of course, the process is not easy. There will be moments of doubt, moments of sadness, moments where you question your decision. You may remember the good times and feel a sense of loss. But you must remind yourself why you made that choice in the first place. You must remind yourself of the pain, the imbalance, the emotional weight that you carried. And you must trust that peace is worth that temporary discomfort. It is also important to understand that letting go is not always about completely cutting someone off. Sometimes it is about creating healthy distance, setting clear boundaries, and protecting your emotional and spiritual space. Not every situation requires the same response, but every situation requires wisdom. And that wisdom comes from being honest with yourself and sincere in your intentions. As you go through this journey, you will realize that your worth is not defined by who stays in your life or who leaves. Your worth is defined by your relationship with Allah, by your character, by your sincerity. When you truly understand this, you stop holding on to people out of fear and you start holding on to your values with confidence. And perhaps the most beautiful part of letting go for the sake of Allah is that it brings a sense of relief that you cannot explain. A calmness settles in your heart, a clarity fills your mind, and a quiet strength begins to grow within you. You realize that you did not lose anything of value, but rather you protected something priceless, your peace, your faith, and your qalb. Trusting Allah's plan is one of the most profound yet challenging aspects of faith, especially when people walk away from your life without explanation, without closure, and sometimes without any apparent reason. It leaves a space in your heart, a question in your mind, and a heaviness that is difficult to put into words. You begin to wonder why it happened, what you did wrong, and whether things could have been different if you had acted another way. These thoughts can consume you if you allow them, pulling you deeper into confusion and sadness. But this is where faith steps in. This is where you remind yourself that nothing in your life happens randomly. Every meeting, every connection, every separation is already known to Allah before it even unfolds. What you perceive as an unexpected loss is, in reality, part of a divine plan that is far greater than your understanding. And sometimes what hurts you today is actually protecting you from something that could have harmed you tomorrow. When someone walks away from your life, it is natural to feel pain. Islam does not teach you to suppress your emotions or pretend that you are unaffected. You are human and your pulse feels deeply. But what Islam teaches is how to process that pain with trust, with patience, and with reliance on Allah. It teaches you to say, this was not meant for me, even when your heart is still trying to hold on. You see, we often become attached to people not just because of who they are, but because of the role they play in our lives. They become part of our routine, part of our comfort, part of our plans. And when they leave, it feels as though a part of us has been taken away. But the reality is no one can take away what Allah has truly written for you. If something is meant to stay, no force in this world can remove it. And if something is meant to leave, no effort on your part can hold it back. This understanding changes everything. It shifts your focus from questioning the why to accepting the what is. It brings a sense of calm to your heart because you begin to realize that you are not in control of everything, and that is not a weakness, it is a relief. You do your best, you treat people well, you fulfill your responsibilities, and beyond that, you leave the outcome to Allah. Trusting Allah's plan also means believing that His wisdom is perfect even when your understanding is limited. There are things you see and there are things you do not see. There are consequences you are aware of and there are consequences hidden from you. Perhaps that person leaving your life is saving you from a future heartbreak that would have been far greater. Perhaps it is creating space for someone better, someone more aligned with your values, someone who will bring you closer to Allah instead of distracting you from Him. And sometimes it is not even about replacing that person. Sometimes it is about bringing you back to yourself. It is about reminding you that your ultimate dependence should not be on people, but on Allah. Because people change, circumstances change, and relationships change, but Allah remains constant. When you build your heart around Him, you develop a stability that cannot be shaken by the coming and going of people. There is also a deep sense of freedom in trusting Allah's plan. When you stop trying to control every outcome, when you stop overthinking every situation, when you stop chasing explanations that may never come, you begin to feel lighter. You begin to live with more ease, more acceptance, more peace. You understand that your job is not to figure everything out, but to trust, to have sabr, and to keep moving forward with sincerity. Of course, this level of trust does not come overnight. It is something you build over time through reflection, through prayer, through experiencing life's ups and downs. Each time you go through a difficulty and come out stronger, your trust increases. Each time you look back and realize that something you once thought was a loss turned out to be a blessing, your iman deepens. And slowly your perspective begins to change. So when people walk away from your life, do not see it as the end of something valuable. See it as a redirection. See it as a part of your journey that is leading you exactly where you need to be. Hold on to the lessons, let go of the pain, and place your trust in the one who knows what you do not know. Because in the end, it is not about who stays or who leaves, but about how you grow, how you trust, and how you remain connected to Allah with a qalb that is content with His decree. Protecting your heart from negativity and distractions is not a luxury in Islam, it is a necessity. Your qalb is not just an organ that keeps you alive physically, it is the center of your spiritual existence. It is where your intentions are formed, where your iman settles, where your sincerity grows, and where your connection with Allah is nurtured. So when your heart is constantly exposed to negativity, it begins to weaken, and when it weakens, everything else begins to fall apart. You may not notice it at first. Negativity does not always arrive in obvious ways. Sometimes it comes through the words you hear, the conversations you engage in, the content you consume, or the people you surround yourself with. It slowly settles into your thoughts, influences your mindset, and begins to shape the way you see the world. What once felt peaceful starts to feel heavy. What once inspired you begins to drain you. And before you realize it, your heart is no longer in a state of calm, but in a constant state of disturbance. Islam places a strong emphasis on guarding the heart because everything stems from it. When your heart is pure, your actions become sincere. When your heart is distracted, your actions lose their depth. This is why protecting your heart is not just about avoiding obvious sins, but also about being mindful of subtle influences that pull you away from remembrance of Allah. Not everything that entertains you benefits you, and not everything that occupies your time is worth your attention. One of the biggest challenges today is the constant exposure to distractions. We live in a world where silence is rare, where the mind is always engaged, where there is always something to watch, something to scroll, something to listen to. And while not all of it is harmful, too much of it can disconnect you from yourself and from Allah. Your heart needs moments of stillness, moments of reflection, moments where it can breathe and reconnect with its purpose. Without these moments, it becomes overwhelmed and distant. Protecting your heart also means being careful about the people you allow into your emotional space. Not everyone deserves access to your pulp. Some people bring peace into your life, while others bring confusion, negativity, and doubt. You must learn to recognize the difference. If someone constantly makes you feel anxious, insecure, or distant from your faith, then you need to reassess their place in your life. This is not about judging others, but about safeguarding your own well-being. At the same time, protecting your heart requires discipline. It requires you to set boundaries, even when it is uncomfortable. It requires you to say no to things that may seem appealing but are ultimately harmful. It requires you to walk away from environments that do not align with your values. And this is not always easy because sometimes the very things you need to distance yourself from are the things you have grown accustomed to. But growth demands change, and change requires courage. Another important aspect of protecting your heart is controlling what you allow your mind to dwell on. Negative thoughts, overthinking, and constant worry can weigh heavily on your heart. If you continuously replay painful memories, focus on what went wrong, or dwell on what others have done to you, your heart will carry that burden. Islam encourages you to have tawakkul, to trust Allah, and to let go of what you cannot control. This does not mean ignoring your problems, but it means not allowing them to consume you. The remembrance of Allah plays a crucial role in cleansing and protecting the heart. When you engage in dhikr, when you recite the Quran, when you turn to Allah in dua, your heart finds a sense of peace that nothing else can provide. It becomes stronger, more resilient, more capable of handling life's challenges. This connection acts as a shield, protecting you from the impact of negativity and grounding you in something greater than the temporary world around you. It is also important to understand that protecting your heart is an ongoing process. It is not something you do once and forget about. Your environment changes, your circumstances change, and new challenges arise. So you must remain aware, continuously checking in with yourself, continuously asking whether what you are allowing into your life is benefiting your heart or harming it. This level of awareness keeps you aligned with your purpose and prevents you from drifting away without realizing it. And as you begin to protect your heart more consciously, you will notice a shift within you. You will feel lighter, calmer, more focused. Your ibadat will become more meaningful. Your connection with Allah will deepen, and your ability to handle difficulties will improve. You will no longer be easily shaken by negativity because your heart will be anchored in something stronger. So guard your heart carefully, not out of fear, but out of understanding its value. Because once the heart is protected, the soul finds peace, the mind finds clarity, and your entire life begins to move in a direction that is pleasing to Allah with a qalb that remains firm, sincere, and at ease